Welcome back to the Chess Geek channel. We are moving on to chapter 5 of the Caro-Kann Masterclass. This chapter is looking at the main line with knight to c3, takes knight to f6, and here rather than continuing with the main line of takes, which leads into the Tartakower, which is what I covered in the previous chapter, we're going to look at all of the other sidelines that white has at their disposal. So knight to g5, knight to g3, bishop to d3, and queen to e2, which are all semi-logical and played options that you need to know how to face. Now, realistically, knight to g3 is the only serious consideration. All of those other ones we can pretty easily and quickly see are not very challenging. So we're going to start with knight to g3. So after knight to g3, I like the move h5, and this move is really verified by the computer. It only became popular in the age of the computer. And what we're trying to do is ram this pawn all the way up. h5, h4, if possible, h3. And when we gain that much space, we're basically fighting for the initiative and the space on the king side. And so let's see how something like this could develop. First of all, h4 is possible to try to block this continuation. But after bishop g4, was it really worth giving away such a beautiful square? f3 is incredibly weakening here. So knight to f3 seems logical, but after e6, we develop our knight, we develop our bishop, super, logical, and their knight here is also super weak because the pawn is no longer in h2. So after something like queen to c7, there's already some issues for them in the position that they have to deal with. Queen to e1, we can castle long here. Castling short is also possible, but after bishop to c5, bishop to g5, we play c5. We're fine here, we're good, but I think it makes a lot more sense to castle long here and continue with the pressure, continue with the attack, use this space to generate and to propel us forward into something further. And this is a wonderful position. I mean, we can continue in a number of ways. We get the rooks over, we move the knight, we try to crash through. We can consider to trade and replace this with a strong knight and then crash through. This knight can come into the game in a variety of ways. We have a great game here ahead of us. A different option they have, by the way, after h4 is to try to immediately trade with bishop e2 and carve out this square. And this will lead to a game that I found. Black certainly didn't play in the only way possible, but this was a very nice game, right? They carve out space, they expand on both sides of the board. Get pressure going, very heavy pressure on the c-file. We have rook takes, the queen moves, king to b7, and although the game remained quite complicated going into the endgame, notice that black was always with the initiative here. Black, generally speaking, had the first punch here, and materially we're up a pawn. We've maintained that pawn for a long time, and it's just caused added stress into the position that eventually allowed black to break through here. Finally, black resigned because they're losing further pawns. This pawn is weak, but it is defended. Our king can, find shelter and then take this pawn, and we're gonna promote something. This is not gonna be a draw. This is winning, completely winning for black. So going all the way back, I breezed through these variations very quickly because h4 is just not so common. It's not so likely. Much more likely is the move knight f3, trying to continue developing. But now we go h4. And after they move, well, now we go h3, right? And this is what I was hinting upon earlier. We're carving out an enormous amount of space. It's a super fun way to accelerate our attack and accelerate our space in the position. So the way that we develop our pieces, which sometimes is a bit awkward, I'll admit, is we first try to develop the bishop, then we go e6 so that our nice strong structure is not dependent on a bishop on c8, which is going to be very weak. First we develop the bishop, and then we can control these dark squares and eventually expand. e5 sometimes, more likely c5. This knight comes to d7 where it's very strong and supports both of these pawn breakthroughs, and we can generate a very fun attack. So queen to a5, getting the queen out. There's a couple of ways to attack here, by the way. Notice we've carved out this space. We've traded, opened up the position. They castled into this. They were kind of forced to, by the way, because otherwise we would have continued an attack over here as well. So they castled into this, but now after a move like castles, we can come in. However, you do want to be a bit careful because castles knight g5 does allow a slightly annoying position, right? The fork here, this becomes much more complicated. So a knight's idea is king to e7 here. Very similar idea. We're going rook h8, but we're taking the sting out of knight to g5 because the pawn on f7 is beautifully supported. So king to e7, they go, let's say rook e1, we come in rook h8, and again, there's further complications and variations that we could discuss, but the gist of the position is that we're the ones attacking. We're the ones that can swing, the queen's over, the knight's over, the bishop is strong, this knight can come in. We're the ones playing for something further than a draw. And that is what this h5, h4, h3 idea gives us. It gives us that ability and that gateway to get an initiative from the beginning that we can then use to generate a very deadly attack. So this is kind of my recommendation. If they go knight g3, ram this pawn up. I told you how to develop, right? Take out the bishop first, then go for this nice solid structure, develop the bishop, develop the queen, and eventually ram through. So now I want to focus on some alternative options that are typically not so good. First of all, bishop d3 we can very quickly dismiss. It simply gives us a pawn, and there's no tactical justification for this. I mean, sometimes obviously there's a check here that would be deadly. None of that exists because of the pawn on c6, which is really solid. It does take away some of the development, but it gives us an extra added pressure of added layer of protection. And here, after a move like knight f3, we drop the queen back to d5. They can take, we take, castles, bishop e6. They have zero justification or compensation for the pawn, and we're simply up material. I mean, yes, our king is slightly open, but the second the bishop comes to e6, that becomes more or less irrelevant. The bishop can come to d6 quickly, and we can castle just in a matter of a couple of moves. And yeah, they have zero play here. I mean, there's no reason to give up that pawn. Sometimes you'll see your opponents play. Sometimes they don't even see the pawn because it's defended. They want to defend the knight, so they put their bishop here to defend it. But by doing so, they don't notice that they simultaneously leave this pawn without protection. So sometimes you can just win the game really from the get-go, just like that. I want to look at knight to g5 quickly. We go h6, clarify the situation. Knight takes f7. Is a possibility. I don't know where people got the idea to start doing this. It somehow became trendy, in the last couple of years, but it makes no sense. I mean, king takes f7. Maybe you'll see this in Blitz or Bullet online, but aside from that, it has zero objective or even practical justification for this. The king is perfectly safe. There's no checks that are dangerous. We're up a piece. I mean, I don't feel the need to continue showing variations in that. So knight to g5, h6, we're going to look at knight 5 to f3. And the issue with this move is that it takes away the square for the knight. And now, this knight can develop elsewhere, but it becomes a bit more awkward. There's a huge amount of pieces here, not so many pieces here. And so finding simply the squares to develop effectively becomes a bit challenging. So, I'll show a variation. Bishop g4 and e6. Why did we go bishop g4 first? Because again, e6 we only do once the bishop is out. That is a very important rule. Don't forget that. h3, we can, consider to take, sure. Bishop h5, by the way, is a completely fine alternative. But after g4, bishop to g6, it becomes a bit weak. I mean, the pawn here, probably this is objectively fine, but practically I would stick away from this. So I recommend simply taking, which is not bad. It might seem like we're giving away the two bishops, which we are, but this bishop isn't our good bishop, right? This dark square bishop, that's the one that we want to preserve and utilize. So bishop d6, castles, knight d7, and we strike with c5, as I mentioned. This is the setup that we're going for, c5 to gain space. And, you know, we can end the variation here. We can develop our pieces supernaturally. The rook comes in, we can consider the take, we can push further, you know, get some things going. Notice takes, and then push and fork. This is a common approach and way to win some material. And so we have some tactical ideas, some positional ideas. It's anybody's game, but we're certainly not worse. We've completely equalized the position. So knight g5, a possibility, you might see this, you know, maybe in 1/10 of your games from this position, but it really doesn't have much objective justification for it. So queen to e2. This is another option. They are trying to go for some tricks here. Knight d7 would be absolutely tragic. Do not ever play into this, please. This allows mate in 1 with knight d6. This is basically the only reason that the move queen e2 is played, and the only reason that queen e2 can actually be justified. Otherwise, the queen is simply blocking in the bishop and the knight, and it's just making a mess of the developmental issues that white has. So what do we do instead? There's a couple of approaches. Queen takes d4 is completely fine, and I actually want to talk a little bit about the idea, perhaps going back a bit. Knight to d7 is another option in this position, but now queen e2 is a bit more justified because we can't take this pawn and they're still threatening mate. So this becomes a bit more scary in this position, but that's the benefit of going knight f6. If they still try to come here, our queen has a simple sight to this pawn, and we simply take this, and I'm just going to stop it here, right? We're threatening the knight. We develop our bishop, our knight, e6. We strike in the center. The knight can come in. We're up a pawn, and again, there's zero justification for that pawn. So realistically, if we're looking at the serious options they have, knight g3 and knight takes f6. Knight takes f6 we studied thoroughly in the previous chapter. Knight g3 we looked at in the beginning of this chapter with h5, h4, h3 being the idea. Any other option that they have, for one reason or another, is not so scary and does not carry any merit whatsoever. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Make sure you guys subscribe, and so you can stick around for the continuation of this masterclass. Like this video if you learned something new from it, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.